Welcome to the Wayne Public Library's virtual author chat. My guest today is Carmela Cattuti. Carmela is the author of Between the Cracks and The Ascent, both of which are based on her great aunt's life story. The third book in this trilogy is expected to be released this year. Welcome, Carmela. Please tell us a little bit about your great aunt and what inspired you to write her story.
Well, she was kind of an amazing person. She was my nanny, really, because my father had died when I was very young, and we lived in an extended family situation, as many people did back in the 1950s and 60s, especially Italian families. So she experienced the 1908 earthquake in Messina. And that just, I mean, half the population was gone when that happened, even over that. And she ended up in a convent, and my uncle, who came from America, he was 12 when he immigrated, but he went to America to look for a bride. And his cousin said, go to the convent. There are a lot of girls without families. So he chose my aunt. And so she had to make a decision whether to become a nun or take a chance. And so she did. And she ended up raising like 3 generations of Americans, because she never had any children due to physical ill health. And she told me all of her stories. She told me her experiences after the earthquake. And so she was fabulously creative. I mean, she developed a dressmaking business. And at that time, the Italian communities were quite insular. They left Manhattan. They spent some time in Manhattan, but my uncle liked to buy up real estate.
Oh.
And that's what he did. And he knew how to repair everything. So he was my great uncle. I mean, he was a plumber, he was an architect. He just knew. So he bought up real estate and would maintain those properties, and then would rent them out to other Italians who came, who immigrated. So they had a very stable base in which to raise families, really. So we shared a home with them. We had a huge Queen Anne Victorian home. And then when my father passed away, she raised us. My mom was a professional and went out to work. And so I spent a lot of hours with her, and a lot of hours in front of a mirror being measured for garments. So she made all of my clothes. And, back then you were very fussy with how you made your clothes. And then she would just tell me her experiences, and her experiences really encompass political aspects of life and also spiritual and religious. And many of the Sicilians did not like the church, although they did go to Mass. But in Sicily, back in the early 20th century, the church was in cahoots with the aristocracy. And so your average Sicilian did not like priests, because they were really designed to keep the poorer population down, regardless of what they said. So my uncle never liked them, And of course, my aunt had a great respect for the nuns because they raised her. She was 10 when that earthquake happened. So, but she had her own spiritual experiences, which included the unseen world, and she had a lot of reverence for Mary, because she felt like Mary saved her life. When she was ill, when she first came to this country. So, and also she expanded beyond the community, and most people who immigrated really didn't do that. And so she made dresses for wealthy women in town. So she made them for Jewish women and Protestant women who had money, who could pay for her services. So really, when the Depression hit, they weren't affected. They just weren't, because there was always work around for them. So, her influence on me was mega, just that kind of survival attitude and the willingness to integrate into American culture, but keep her own culture. And she was also seen as quite exotic by the women that she made clothing for, because she was really gorgeous. She was beautiful. And she spoke both Italian and Sicilian. And she said that's how it was a mark of an educated person, not necessarily a college. Encouraged everybody to go to college. So she used to say, someone should write my story. Someone should write my story. And then I ended up doing that. When I was a graduate student at Boston College, I started it then. So, it was just fascinating. And she did have opinions about political life, but she realized when she got to America, it really wasn't what she thought it was going to be. Her family wasn't going to be what she thought it would be, since she couldn't have children. And, she ended up taking care of everybody else. My uncle's mother, she had to take care of him, her mother-in-law, and she ended up taking care of my uncle's nieces and nephews too. She took care of them. So she raised my father, and then she raised us as well. She raised my grandmother, because my grandmother was like 9 years old when she immigrated. And, she didn't have a great mother. So my aunt taught her, all the niceties and all the skills and social skills and all of that. So I think her story is really important. Her immigration was different from most people. My uncle, in fact, the convent, the Mother Superior told my uncle, you have to come back in a year, and you have to come back with this amount of money, in order to, well, yeah, they wanted something out of this. Since
So he went there and he saw your great aunt.
Well, he spoke to the nuns first, and they just paraded my aunt in front of him without her knowing. So yeah, they were going to pay. He was going to pay for that.
But it wasn't like, okay, you get to choose now. No. Come back in a year. Okay, interesting.
You want to marry this person, then you have to come back in a year with money.
How old was she when she was married? She
was 18.
Okay. So she was 8 years in the convent?
Yeah. Yeah, they raised her, and she was going to become a nun, and that was too limiting for her. But there were very limited choices. She had no family. They were wiped out.
I'm the list of who she lost.
Everybody.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and she did have an adventurous mind. And there was no point in her staying in Sicily. Her brother passed after the earthquake from pneumonia. He was put in a similar situation with priests.
Mm-hmm.
And then he had walking pneumonia, and that was, if he had lived, maybe she would have stayed. They could have developed a life together, since she would have him, but he didn't survive.
So that was it. That was all her entire immediate family.
Yeah, because her sister was never found, her younger sister. Many people perished, and they couldn't find the bodies. And help was slow to come. This is 1908, It was just, and the Americans came, and they took her aboard the ship. So she had a very positive view of Americans, because they saved her. And, after an earthquake, it's terrible, because children are homeless, the old, children ran in packs. What else could you do?
It's like when we think, 24 hours, 40 weeks or months, like they're out there trying to survive.
That's right. That's right. So she had that mind, that survivor mind. And, it wasn't a bed of roses as she proceeded in her marriage, my uncle had a stroke, and there were a lot of frustrations and all of that. But she really loved raising children. She just had a knack for storytelling, and,
It's wonderful that you heard the stories and actually kept them and, like in your head so that you were able to write them down.
Yeah, well, she always repeated them. She always repeated them, and she was supportive of anything I wanted to do. I was like, I could do no wrong, you know. So, yeah, there's not a lot of people around like that anymore, this kind of person. But as we see in the stories, I develop how she influenced, the next generation and how things changed and how the Italian American community changed.
And in the first book, is it all in Italy?
No, it's her immigration and how she took care of my grandmother and what happened to my grandmother, and then how she raised my grandmother's children. Some undesirable things happened there. Of course, in Sicily, it was customary to marry cousins, So after my grandmother died, my grandfather married his niece, went to Sicily and married his sister's child. So my aunt never forgave him for that. Never. So there was always conflict there. And I explore that in the second book. I mean, it's in the last few pages of the first book, then we go into that in the second book and how that fractured everything. So, but, that's what people did, but she felt he committed a sin because Americans did not do that. No. So, yeah.
And so the second novel, The Ascent, is a continuation with another chapter of her life. What's
Right.
the date ranges of The Ascent?
Until 1958, about what would I say? The 40s, 1940s to 1958. And then the third novel picks up starting in the 60s. So you get a very different flavor. Her attitude toward war, you had the Vietnam War. In the second book, it's more about World War II and what happened to people who returned, what she felt about war, what she knew about it, the news she was getting from Europe, because she still had an interest in Europe because of what was going on there. Because she always kept in touch with the nuns, so she was very concerned about them during the war. And she kept in touch with them up to the 1960s and 70s, I think.
Did she leave Europe before World War I or during?
Yeah, just before it, 1913, just before it. And they went back to Sicily in 1929 to look for her sister because she thought, well, maybe she survived. Couldn't find anything.
Oh.
But they made that trip. Yeah. But she made a whole career in the US and built a life. And in the third book, we meet all of her friends, her lifelong friends, women who immigrated later than she did, who were younger, and her connection to them, which is really fun,
And have you completed that book, or are you still in the process of writing it?
Editing, second edit, big edit. Actually, this might be the fourth edit, but this is a big one. And I'll see what my editor says. Everybody's waiting for it, I get emails. But if it's got to be right. I mean, all of these books have to connect, and you kind of make mistakes, the timelines. You forget, even though you write it all down, you forget some dates, and they pick up on these inconsistencies. And then, I have to have an edit with someone who would say, okay, this is, you have in here, IN needs to be on, but nobody picks it up because something like that can slip by you. So, my publisher really wants all that stuff cleaned up, and you never clean it all up. Some things just slip by you.
And are there characters or people, because you would have known them, that you want to write a story based on them, or
No, based on my generation going forward.
So
But we
like
get a
after,
backstory to some of her friends too in the third novel. Yeah.
and once you've published that one, what do you see in the future? Do you see that you're going to have, are you going to continue writing?
I think so. Yeah, I'm going to continue with some of the themes that I've been developing. So, spiritual progress, because that my aunt was very concerned with that. I mean, she was so intuitive and had a knack for connecting with the intuition and the unseen world and what she could feel around her. So that was something that she had that was innate to her. So I'm going to develop that theme going forward. Organized religion, I address that. And the first book and the second book, and the inconsistencies, all of that. So, yeah, that's interesting. It's developing into something else.
Sounds
But
wonderful.
it stems from her. And
From all of her ideas and her
her
conversations.
ideas and her creativity. I mean, I didn't buy completely off racks till I was 30 years old. I mean, I didn't know what that was. All my clothes were made, And there were a lot of the instances where in the 60s you wore jeans, you cut them off, it was really fun. She would find that I did that and then hem them and starch them.
Wow. And she always lived in the same home that you
Yes,
did?
we had the place, it was a huge Queen Anne Victorian in Peekskill. It's like 45 minutes outside of Manhattan. And Manhattan becomes a character in the books too, because we have spent a lot of time there. And we lived upstairs.
Okay.
So we had 20 rooms, like, one of those big places, and,
Wow.
2 kitchens and 2 living rooms. And, back then, my uncle bought that place. He was very smart to do it because he had other places in town too that he bought. Some of them he sold, and he bought this large house on Nelson Avenue. So, yeah, interesting. I mean, those places now are expensive. They're expensive.
Oh, yeah. So when so you said that, the third novel, but after the third novel, like, are there other book ideas in your head?
Yeah, I'm going to continue the themes of spirituality and religion and move that forward.
Okay.
But they'll all stem from her attitudes.
Okay. And so your aunt, and you said that you started to write her story while you were in college.
In grad school at
in grad
Boston
school.
College, yeah.
And did you always want to write? Did you always write other stories?
I thought I would always write her story.
Just her story, not.
Yeah, I know. I just wanted to write this one and see where that took me. So, yeah.
Okay. And so have you said you were writing since like your grad school days,
Yeah.
but
yeah.
So it wasn't like a you journaled when you were younger, and then
no, because I was doing academic writing in college, which wasn't the way I wanted to go at the end, I just didn't, because my whole family's creative, so.
So, and how much time do you spend on writing, like any given day?
I like to do 4 pages a day, if I can. Not every day, but if I sit down to write, it's 4 pages.
And are you a morning and afternoon? Morning. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a morning writer.
And what has been the most difficult part of writing?
Oh, the editing process and moving things around. It's easier now with Word, but my editor will say, move this to the beginning, so you just cut and paste. It's easier. But
how long? I mean, I saw the first one, Between the Cracks, is pretty long. It's a pretty long book. The Ascent is a little bit shorter. So how long
Yeah, because I thought I'm going to make this a little shorter for people, see if I can condense it. But now the new novel, I have to give you the name of it, The Benevolence of New Ideas is the new novel. And that'll be over 300 pages. I'm hoping it'll stay there, but I'm waiting. My editor might say, okay, you need to expand here and there. I think people write, I would rather be more concise than write more pages,
True. And you had mentioned that the audio version of Between the Cracks.
Between the Cracks, yep, there's an audio version, yeah.
And will there be one?
I will do the Ascent too.
Okay.
Yeah, and people can find all this on Amazon or on my website.
And as I said, you did donate the copy of each of the books to the library. So it is available here, and it is they're out. So you'd have to put yourself on hold. And we were talking earlier about your cover and how they're just really striking covers. And how was that process of finding somebody?
Well, I'm a painter, so I had initially I had my paintings on the cover, but it doesn't work as well for marketing. It has to be consistent. The covers have to connect if it's a trilogy, So my publisher, actually I use a designer, she suggested, and she did a fabulous job with it. And the cover of Between the Cracks, let's see, we have, New York City with a picture of a woman, early 20th century, is very European looking. So, a book cover for the other one. People have been buying them and I don't have it, but it's similar, and it's more of a reddish hue. This is more of a purplish hue, and so.
And you mentioned your art. Do you find inspiration, did you find inspiration from your aunt and her
I guess, I don't know, I wouldn't have said that, but maybe so. I've always had an interest in museums and painters. I think so. Well, back in the early 20th century, Italians decorated their home with 19th century reproductions of saints and, Virgin Mary. And so we had all those reproductions in our house. So that kind of art was around when I was a kid. So it must have, I would guess,
Okay. I was on your website and I saw that you describe what you do, the writing, the art, and the yoga as an amalgamation of your creative output. How are all three linked for you?
Well, they're linked energetically because yoga is an energetic practice and it's also very creative. Painting is also very intuitive and creative, although I am leaning more toward realism now. I bring that aspect of energetic movement to my paintings too. And the same with writing books. So it has to do with connection of your intuition in all three practices. And my aunt did that. She did it in relationships, in her patterns, in creating gowns for people. She would make wedding gowns. She made my Catholic school uniforms. She made the blouses. She could make a suit. I mean, there was nothing. She made a hat. She made,
Wow.
She wasn't a milliner, but she could make hats, and she just.
And this is stuff she learned from
nuns.
From the nunnery?
Yeah, but I imagine her mother taught her something. She was just very talented that way. Yeah, and she was always well dressed, of course, herself.
Well, if she was that talented, obviously, show off her wares.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Did you had mentioned earlier you wanted to read a piece of
Oh, yeah, I thought I would read the preface to the new book.
okay.
So some people might have read the first two. So I'll just give a sense of the third book.
Okay.
The Benevolence of New Ideas. And the quote that I'm going to be using is from Estee Lauder, which I think is appropriate
Yes.
into the fashion industry. When I thought I couldn't go on, I forced myself to keep going. My success is based on persistence, not luck. Okay, so the preface is called The Transition. Angela sat by her husband's hospital bed and waited for the end to come. She wondered how she should move forward in her life after Franco took his last breath. He had brought her from Sicily in 1913, and now, years later, he lay dying from a stroke. In life, he consistently expressed his opinion regardless of popular sentiment, and now his voice was gone, and his shallow breathing was the last functioning system. He had had several strokes over the years. Now this was the one that would take his life. Angela had sat with many of her family members and friends during the past decades as they transitioned into the next world. Her mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and older Italian immigrants who left their homeland and never saw the land of their birth again. Franco's chest rose slowly and fell abruptly as his lungs were attempting to perform their function, but the soul who had inhabited the body had already vacated and was waiting for his lungs to stop so he could complete the process and move on. When Franco executed his final breath, Angela anxiously awaited his next inhale, but his chest was still. He had gone. Angela had cared for him during his long illness, and now she was free. She felt the relief she felt made her cringe. How could she so easily feel relief when Franco had suffered? She grieved, but was thankful there would be no more concerns about him leaving home alone, or trips to the doctor, or Franco insisting he could perform a task when he couldn't. He had emigrated from Sicily at age 12 in the early 20th century, full of energy and promise. Now in 1968, Angela looked back and felt he deserved a more dignified ending. Franco brought Angela from the convent orphanage in Palermo to a new life in Nelsonville, New York, about 45 minutes north of Manhattan. It was not the life she thought she would have in America, but what she had created in America she never would have had the opportunity to experience had she stayed in Sicily. Angela kissed Franco several times on both cheeks and on the lips. The doctors had said it was a matter of time until he would pass away. She could see death hovering him and begin to slowly drape his body from his head to his feet, as if giving Angela time to say goodbye. Addio, mio caro, whispered Angela. Grazie di tutto. Tears rolled down her face onto Franco's cheek and mouth. His eyes were open and fixed, as if peering into the world beyond. She put her hands on the side of his face with her thumbs closed his eyes. The nurse stepped into the room. He's gone, said Angela. Angela gathered her pocketbook and scarf, went to the door, and stepped over the threshold. The nurse had covered Franco's body with a sheet as if to close a chapter on a life. The 1960s were ending, and so was Angela's former life and attitudes. So
That's wonderful.
yeah, so we entered the 1960s, a different era.
What? When did your aunt pass? Like how much time?
1988.
Oh wow.
She was 93. Yeah.
Oh my. What a long life. Wow.
Yeah. And she sewed up till she was 80. Mm-hmm.
That's pretty impressive. And did she sell for people in, I mean, when she was in New York City, it was for in New York City. When she went into the suburbs, did she continue to go back into New York to?
No, her clientele was in Nelsonville. Yeah.
And did she work for any designers?
Well, she worked for the nuns at St. Mary's. My uncle was like a handyman for them. This was an Episcopal school, Episcopal nuns. And my uncle did plumbing and all this stuff for the nuns. And they hired her to design vestments and make linens and that sort of thing. And that's how she got started. She didn't speak English. It took her a year to learn the language. And then after she did, then she started to take on clients.
So that's really impressive that there was no designer. I mean, there's so many designers in New York, but
well, I don't think she kind of realized that. She was just an immigrant person, but she knew she could design things for people, for women who could afford it. And so that was her focus.
That's wonderful.
And her advertising was just the clothing people wore.
That's enough. That's enough.
Yeah. Well, back then, yeah. I mean, she didn't really have the savvy to, design clothing, and she was too busy with kids,
So she did this all at home. She'd be teaching the kids, and she'd be sewing.
Yeah, in the hallway, she had her sewing machine right at the window and a huge mirror on the side. And that's where people would come up on her platform and she would measure them, and she did it all right there.
It's really impressive.
Yeah.
A great life to write, and you're writing 3 books on it, so very impressive life.
Well, 3 generations. Yeah.
Now she, how is the connection? Like who you said she raised your grandmother?
Yeah, because she, my uncle, my great uncle, he had a younger sister, who was like 9 years old.
Okay.
Back then. And, they were in Manhattan. They were probably in a tenement, and I don't know where that was. But my uncle, he was working in Peekskill for the nuns at that time, and he was going back and forth. But then he got a place in Peekskill, and so he decided to settle there, to get out of the city.
And I watched this, that I watched the video that you did, I guess it was the PowerPoint presentation. Was there a princess or something that
Oh, yeah, Princess of Palermo. My aunt, that convent was connected to the Prince and Princess of Palermo. They gave the nuns a building, Piazza Butera. It's in Palermo. And they gave the nuns a building, and they took care of these orphans, and they had a school there.
Okay.
And they paid special attention to my great aunt. The princess just loved her, and so when it came time for her to get married, she had a big bash at Palazzo Butera, and they paid for it. So she had a real connection there. And both of their last names were similar. So there was some kind of connection there. And in the novel, I kind of connected it to her being like the dirty little secret, of the prince's brother had maybe been her dad, because she had this connection to this princess who, paid special attention to her. And I have a document where she couldn't attend my aunt's wedding, and she said, "I'm up north, and congratulations." And I still have that.
Did they ever? I mean, I assume they met like in the convent. But did they ever meet again in life, or no?
No, they did not. No, they did not. So who knows? It was just kind of interesting. I mean, I never knew why they paid special attention to her. Well, my aunt said, "Well, it's just because I was really pretty and talented and alone in the world." And,
The other question I had is if you had any advice for any new writers who might be starting out.
What is it?
I said, do you have any advice for any writers that might be starting out?
Yeah, you have to write that first draft. You know, you have to sit down and write that first draft. And you have to set up how many pages you want to do in a day.
And if they want to write a story like that's based like yours, which is historical fiction, but it's based on real people, how is that? Like, I imagine that might be a little tricky sometimes to keep it a balance so that you're not sharing information that of people that might still be alive.
Right. You want to make sure they're gone.
Okay.
And, you know, like all my aunt's friends are gone, so I could use their first names. You know, they had great names, so just use them. You know, so you have to be careful and you have to do your research. You know, if you're talking about a certain period in history, you have to do that. Use a thesaurus to vary your writing. And then there's a website, now I can't remember it. One Stop for Writers.
Okay.
They have a source there that's amazing. And there, I think you can pay something every month, and she has an expanded site for other suggestions, but the source is free. You know, suggestions for mood, for place, all of that.
That's great.
And that section is free. So that's great to have, use as reference, you know. But yeah, get your first draft down and don't worry about spelling or anything.
Okay.
Because you're gonna have to edit anyway.
Yeah, always. Always.
You're gonna have to, yeah.
I wanted to ask our audience member if you had a question, if you wanted to type it in the chat box, and I will read it. If you don't, that's okay. I know that my unfortunately she did not show the member of my book group. She wants to know what the nuns what say what kind of nuns, like what
Sisters of Charity.
Sisters
of Charity. They were a French order of nuns.
Okay, and she has family that was from Palermo, and she's told me a story of how her great grandfather ran out during the earthquake, and he, I guess, had been in the shower, so he ran out naked, and then her great grandmother ran behind him with a sheet to cover him up. I don't know how close they were to the earthquake itself, because I imagine an earthquake can be felt for many miles.
Yeah, well, it was followed by a tsunami.
Oh.
And a lot of aftershocks. That's why that population just was diminished in Messina.
And it was just in Sicily, or they felt it on the mainland, like felt it on. And
they might have felt something on the mainland, but it was mostly in Sicily. Yeah.
Just what a tragedy.
Mount Etna.
I will say thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was fun.